Right. So, hello everybody. Yeah. First of all, thank you for this invitation today. That allows me to share our research to such a nice and broad audience. As Lynn said, my name is Stylianos Asteriadis, and I'm an associate professor at the University of Maastricht here in the Netherlands. My presentation today has the title Efficient and Robust Feature Representations for Human Behavior Analysis. And specifically, we will look at a little bit more in depth at our ongoing research on the role that self-supervised learning can play towards that direction. Um, I'm working at the Department of Data Science and Knowledge Engineering here in Maastricht, and my research interests are within the areas of multimodal human behavior recognition, affective and visual computing, and machine intelligence, of course, focusing on deep learning technologies. And my group's goal is to always apply our research in actual societal needs. So we collaborate very closely with end users, direct end users that wish to apply AI solutions on ambient assisted living environments, such as in hospitals, for example, or smart education, where the progress of learning or even behavioral characteristics of somebody during learning is much needed. I will show a couple of examples in a bit. And so I have decided to split my presentation today in two parts. In the first part, I'm going to give an overview of multimodal fusion in different cases when it comes to human behavior recognition. So I will very briefly describe some examples of the work that we do in that direction. And secondly, I will talk about self-supervised learning and human activity recognition, and I will present some work in progress that we are doing in my group. Right, so one of the areas that we are very active in human behavior, of course, I forgot to say that human behavior recognition is a very broad field, of course, right? So I'm going to focus on very specific topics here. This doesn't mean that the slides that follow cover the whole area of automated human behavior recognition, because that is a very broad one. So the field covers multiple applications, different kinds of sensors, different kinds of AI techniques, different kinds of challenges and problems. But I'm going to focus mainly on human activity recognition and human emotion recognition. So for example, in this slide, we see how we are making use of facial expressivity and digital interactions of a person that is interacting with a learning material or a serious game or just an entertaining game. And what we're doing here is making use of the theory of flow, actually, its simplified form. What does the theory of flow say? Well, according to the theory of flow, depending on how good somebody is at something and depending on how difficult or easy that something is, you can expect the user to fall into a certain emotional or cognitive state. And in simplified form, that would be anxiety if somebody is not very good at something, but this something is quite difficult. Engagement or flow and boredom. So you may be very good at something and maybe this something, game or quiz or whatever is too easy for you and then you become bored. And in our research, we are doing actually the opposite thing. So we are trying to infer human emotion through facial expressivity and the actual interactions that happen with the environment. And then by detecting the emotion and by knowing how good the user is at this, we can say, all right, maybe it is time now to increase or decrease the challenge, the level of difficulty of the environment in order to bring the user to a desired state, which is usually something between flow and anxiety. And this is where optimal learning and interactions take place. Another area of research that we're active in is ambient assisted living. So here you see a person's silhouette, actually just some track points on the silhouette of somebody who is suffering from Alzheimer's disease. And the idea here is to make use of deep learning architectures in order to infer motion characteristics or the trajectory of this person in their environment. And then maybe we detect that this person is undergoing some confusion episode, which is quite typical among Alzheimer's patients, or being engaged in repetitive patterns, which is also worrisome, or they're just acting normally. And depending on the outcome of the classifier, some further action may be taken by the healthcare personnel, for instance. Another area of research in multimodal analysis that my group is active in, and actually that was part of the PhD dissertation of a PhD student in my group, Stylianos Asteriadis, has to do with generative adversarial networks. And the idea here is to augment a data set with audio or video files that are enriched with emotion by only having at our disposal the corresponding other modalities files. So if you show the topology a happy face, then you would expect the synthesized file, the synthesized audio, to be that corresponding to laughter, for example, and vice versa. And my last example that I wanted to share with you is our research in personality computing. And what we did here, and that was actually the a PhD project that we had in my group of Dr. Dario Dotti, is to make use of human motion characteristics and postural characteristics, feed them into a deep autoencoder, and then make use of the features of the corresponding embeddings in an LSTM topology in order to tell something about the personality traits of this person. And the very interesting thing is that this research was applied in both social contexts, so settings like a cocktail party where you do expect the personality of somebody to show up, but we also made some experiments in non-social contexts. So how does a person behave when they're just interacting alone in an environment when they just have to do normal everyday tasks, for instance. Right, but all of these things, as many of you may know, are coming with a lot of challenges, because here we have to do with data that are coming from social signals. We have to do with behavioral data, and of course we have to do with inter and intrapersonal differences. So of course the way that different people express their emotions or their behaviors or their activities is different, and this is quite a personal thing. But even sometimes you find these differences within the same person, depending on our mood, depending on the time of the day, depending on our emotion. Maybe we express ourselves differently, and we conduct and the same activity in different ways according to all these factors. And moreover, if you want to train a classifier to make use of visual or audio or wearable signals, you do not expect that this information, the needed information for your classifier, will show all the time. So it's quite a sparse signal, if I can put it like that. And of course, deep neural networks are more and more complicated, becoming more and more complicated. And there is a stronger and stronger need for labeled data, for annotated data sets, in order to be sure that our classifiers will be as accurate as possible. And this is actually the problem that I would like to focus on in the remainder of my presentation. And for this reason, I have chosen to talk about self-supervised learning, which is an area that we are looking into in my group together with my PhD student, Bulat Kartinov, where the idea is to train efficient representations that can also be used for classification in the absence of annotated training data, because annotating data is quite a tedious task, and many people are looking for solutions to this challenge. So self-supervised learning is not a new concept, but I would say that it revived lately, and it is gradually taking its role among the state-of-the-art algorithms for big data management through deep neural networks. And yeah, one of the pioneer works lately is the one that is coming from the area of contrastive learning, the so-called SimCLR work of Google Research. And the idea is quite simple there. So imagine that you have a data set of animals, for instance, and you don't really have an annotation of the different classes of animals. Like in this case, all you know is that you have different samples. So you would expect that by generating a different view, as we call it, of the dog, in this case, these two samples would be sharing some characteristics, whereas this sample of the elephant will be belonging to a different sample, will be need to be repelled away. And the idea is exactly this, how to train encoders for these images that once they feed the projection multi-layer perceptron and projection hat, will keep these two positive samples, as we call them, together, and will repel this example apart. And this is exactly what we have applied in human activity recognition as well. So by looking into a multimodal data set, a multimodal sample corresponding with human activities, we create different views. This could be the addition of noise, small distortions, anything, or smoothing, anything you can think of that can distort our signal a bit. And we would train one DCNNs followed by self-attention mechanisms in order to focus on the informative parts of the signal. In order to find representations that once projected on a space, they would be similar with each other when these augmented views are coming from the same sample and will be repelled away when they are coming from different samples. And this is the idea. And this is called the pretext task. At this stage, we have not any annotated data at all. All we have is a bunch of data, a bunch of samples. We don't know which classes they come from. All we can do is generate positive and negative examples. By positive samples, I am referring to samples that are coming to that are augmentations of the same sample, and by negative samples, I just mean different samples. And we want to maximize and minimize their similarities accordingly. The fine-tuning task then is where the idea of making use of these encoder features pre-trained in the pretext task are used. So you're taking this encoder network frozen, you don't train it again, and all you train again is this prediction MLP now having some labels, because all we have in the fine-tuning task is a bunch of data, of annotated data at this point, but they don't have to be a lot, because we are using this encoder part pre-trained from the pretext task. And then all you need to train is this prediction MLP, multi-layer perceptron, which can consist of a couple of layers only. We have made use of 3 data sets, and in view of time, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. I'm just going to say that the data that we have used at this point are wearable sensors, but this can be replaced by audio or video data as well for classifying everyday activities. And if you check the corresponding paper that I referred to before, you will see that we run a number of different experiments, but probably the most striking ones are coming from the area of transfer learning, where we made use of the first data set, both in a supervised and in a self-supervised form, to see whether we can create encoders that will then be used on new data sets. So we made use of the MobiAct data set in the pretext task when it comes to self-supervised learning, and then for the fine-tuning task, we use the other 2 data sets. And actually, this is the essence of self-supervised learning, but in this case, for transfer learning. And we can see that the results are quite competitive with regards to the state of the art. But what is more noteworthy, if I could say, if I could put it like that, is that our self-supervised results can even outperform the corresponding ones when they are coming from supervised scenario. So in supervised scenario, we trained everything with the first data set in a supervised fashion, end to end. And Then we compared with the self-supervised case, and in the self-supervised case, we managed to achieve even higher results than the supervised one, which shows the potential of this idea in human behavior recognition. And with this, I would like to thank you. I hope I was within time, and yeah, thank you very much for your attention, and I will be waiting for your questions at the end of this session.